Bride of the Hollow King. Briar Renwick had always known the town of Thornmoor held secrets, but none as deadly as the one buried beneath the church. The crypt had been sealed for a century, the stone door bound in silver. No one spoke of what lay beneath until the night she found her name carved into the lock. That same night, the howling began. A storm rolled in, the sky burned red with lightning. And when she turned to run, a man stepped from the shadows, his golden eyes gleaming in the stormlight. "You were not supposed to find this," he murmured, tilting his head. "Now you have no choice but to set me free." Chapter 1. The Awakening of Destiny. The chill of the late October air bit at Briar Renwick's exposed skin, raising gooseflesh on her arms despite the thick wool of her coat. Thornmoor, her home for all of her 62 years, felt different tonight. An unsettling stillness had fallen, a silence so profound it pressed against her eardrums, a stark contrast to the usual rustling of leaves and distant calls of owls that normally filled the twilight hours. She pulled her scarf tighter, her gaze fixed on the ancient stone church that dominated the town square. St. Michael's, with its imposing Gothic architecture and weathered gargoyles, had always been a comforting presence, a symbol of constancy in her otherwise predictable life. But tonight, it felt ominous, a silent sentinel guarding secrets she was suddenly, inexplicably, drawn to. Briar had been on her usual evening walk, a ritual she'd maintained for years, a way to clear her head and soothe the persistent ache in her heart, a lingering grief for her late husband, Thomas, gone these past 5 years. The route always took her past the church, and usually, she'd offer a silent nod to the familiar structure before continuing on. But tonight, something had compelled her to stop. A flicker of movement, perhaps, or a trick of the fading light, had drawn her attention to the small, rarely used side entrance, an ancient, oak-bound door leading to the church crypt. She'd never paid much attention to the crypt before. It was always locked, a relic of a bygone era, a place whispered about in hushed tones by the older townsfolk, but largely ignored by the younger generation. They spoke of a darkness sealed within, a curse that had plagued Thornmoor centuries ago. Briar, a practical woman, had always dismissed such tales as folklore, the embellished remnants of a superstitious past. Yet, as she stood there, the air growing colder, a primal unease stirred within her. The heavy wooden door was ajar, just a sliver, revealing a sliver of inky blackness within. That wasn't right. It was always locked. She remembered old Mrs. Hawthorne, the town historian, telling her once, with a dramatic shiver, that the crypt door was bound in silver, a protection against what? She couldn't quite recall. Something about a beast. A hollow fong. Briar had scoffed then, but now, the memory sent a shiver down her spine. Hesitantly, she approached the door, her boots crunching on the gravel path. The faint scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and strangely wild, wafted from the opening. She reached out, her fingers tracing the cold, rough-hewn wood. And then she saw it. Carved into the aged silver band that encircled the lock, almost obscured by tarnish and time, was her name. Briar. Not Mrs. Renwick, not Briar Thomas, her married name, but simply Briar, as if etched by someone who knew her intimately, someone who had known she would be here, tonight. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just the presence of her name that unnerved her, but the style of the lettering. It was archaic, elegant, almost feral, in its sharp angles and sweeping curves. It looked centuries old. How could her name be on a lock that, according to local legend, hadn't been opened in over 100 years? A low growl rumbled from the depths of the crypt, a sound that vibrated through the very ground beneath her feet. It was a sound she'd never heard before, yet it resonated with something deep within her, a primal fear that bypassed her rational mind and went straight to her bones. Instinct told her to run, to flee this place, and never look back. But her feet remained rooted to the spot, her hand frozen on the door. The wind picked up, whipping her graying hair around her face, carrying with it the scent of impending rain. The sky, which had been a bruised purple, now crackled with streaks of angry red lightning. A storm was brewing, a violent one, and it mirrored the tempest raging within her. Then she heard it, a voice, deep and resonant, coming from the darkness within the crypt. It was a voice that seemed to caress her soul, even as it sent shivers of apprehension down her spine. "You were not supposed to find this," the voice murmured, a hint of both sorrow and something else, something akin to relief, in its tone. Briar strained to see into the darkness, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. A figure began to emerge, slowly, deliberately, as if stepping from a dream or a nightmare. He was tall, incredibly so, his silhouette a stark contrast against the faint light that spilled from the open church door. As he stepped closer, the flickering light of the approaching storm illuminated his features. His face was strikingly handsome, framed by thick, dark hair that fell to his shoulders. But it was his eyes that captivated her, held her prisoner. They were a startling shade of gold, luminous and intense, glowing with an unnatural light that seemed to pierce the darkness. They were the eyes of a predator, yet they held a depth of sadness, a weariness that resonated with her own. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing, questioning. "Now you have no choice but to set me free." His words were not a request, but a statement of fact, a pronouncement of destiny. And in that moment, as the first fat raindrops began to fall, as the thunder echoed the turmoil in her heart, Briar knew that her life, her quiet, predictable life in Thornmoor, was irrevocably changed. She was bound to this man, to this creature, to this ancient curse, in a way she could not yet comprehend. The storm raged, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing within her. It held a horrifying, enthralling question, a whisper from a long-forgotten part of herself. What would she do? Chapter 2. Shadows in the moonlight. The rain lashed down, plastering Briar's hair to her face, blurring the already indistinct world into a watercolor of grays and blacks. The man, no, creature, her mind insisted, remained unmoving, his golden eyes unwavering in their intensity. He seemed untouched by the downpour, the water seeming to slide off his dark, heavy coat as if it were made of oiled silk. "For you?" Briar finally managed to choke out, her voice raspy with fear and a strange, nascent curiosity. "From what? Who are you?" He took a step closer, and Briar instinctively recoiled, her back pressing against the cold stone of the church wall. The metallic, wild scent she'd noticed earlier intensified, a heady mix that both repelled and intrigued her. It smelled of the forest, of damp earth and something untamed, something dangerous. He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he reached out a hand, his long, elegant fingers outstretched. The gesture was hesitant, almost pleading. "The lock, Briar. Your name, it is the key." His voice was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. It was a voice that spoke of centuries, of suffering, of a loneliness that echoed her own, but amplified 1,000-fold. She glanced at the lock, at her name etched into the silver, the metal now gleaming wetly in the intermittent flashes of lightning. The archaic script seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light. I don't understand," she stammered, shaking her head. "How can my name?" "It is a long story," he said, his voice laced with a weariness that belied his imposing presence. "A story of betrayal, of a curse laid upon my bloodline, upon the Hollowfong." The word Hollowfong struck a chord, a memory from Mrs. Hawthorne's rambling tales. The beast of Thornmoor. A creature of legend. A werewolf. Briar's breath hitched. She wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as preposterous, but the evidence before her, the glowing eyes, the unnatural stillness, the primal fear that gripped her was undeniable. She was standing face to face with a creature straight out of a nightmare. She couldn't even bring herself to say the word. He inclined his head, a slight, almost regal gesture. "Yes, I am what your people call a werewolf. But I am also more." He paused, his golden eyes searching hers, as if seeking understanding, acceptance. It was a look that disarmed her, that chipped away at the wall of fear she'd erected. There was a vulnerability in his gaze, a plea for connection that she, despite her terror, found herself responding to. "More?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of the rain. "I am the last of the Holophong line," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Imprisoned here for a century, bound by a curse that only you can break." He looked at her then, with an intensity that made her heart flutter. Not with fear, not entirely, but with something else. Something akin to recognition. As if he knew her, had always known her, in a way that transcended time and space. "Why me?" she asked, the question a desperate plea for clarity in the swirling chaos of the night. He stepped closer again, and this time, she didn't flinch. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a warmth that defied the cold rain. He smelled of the storm, of ozone and wet earth, and that underlying, wild scent that both terrified and captivated her. "Because," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to penetrate the very core of her being, "your blood is tied to mine. Through generations. Through destiny. You are the descendant of the one who cursed me, and the only one who can set me free." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. The descendant of a witch? A curse weaver? It was absurd, and yet it felt right. There had always been a sense of otherness about her, a feeling of being different, of not quite belonging. Had this been the reason? Was this the secret that Thornmore had kept hidden from her all these years? He saw the confusion, the disbelief, in her eyes. "I know it is much to accept," he said gently, "but I can show you. I can show you everything." He reached out again, and this time, she didn't pull away. His fingers brushed against hers, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity through her body. It was a touch that was both terrifying and exhilarating, a touch that promised both danger and something else. Something she hadn't felt in years. Something akin to hope. Or, she acknowledged, perhaps it was a touch of madness brought on by a desperate need to be released from her grief. The rain continued to fall, a relentless downpour that washed away the old, the familiar, the safe. As she looked into his golden eyes, eyes that held the weight of centuries, eyes that reflected her own hidden depths, Briar knew that she had a choice to make. A choice that would determine not only her fate, but the fate of this creature, this man who stood before her, shrouded in shadows and moonlight. Run and pretend none of this was real, or embrace the impossible. She already felt the pull of the latter, the dark tide of the supernatural beckoning. Chapter 3. The Whispering Woods. The decision, once made, felt strangely inevitable. As if all the paths of her life, all the choices and chances, had led her to this precise moment, to this rain-soaked churchyard and the creature of legend who stood before her, his fate intertwined with hers. "Show me," Briar said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her hands. She wasn't sure what she expected: a vision, a spell, some arcane ritual, but she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she needed to understand. She needed to know the truth about her connection to this man, to this curse. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Not here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We are not safe here. The town, they would not understand." He glanced towards the village, his golden eyes narrowed, as if sensing something she couldn't. Briar followed his gaze. The lights of Thornmore twinkled through the rain, seemingly oblivious to the supernatural drama unfolding in their midst. But she knew, from the hushed whispers and averted gazes she'd encountered over the years, that the town held its secrets close, that the fear of the Holophong, however dormant, still lingered in the collective memory. "Where, then?" she asked, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He turned back to her, his gaze softening. "The woods," he said. "The Whispering Woods. There is a place where the veil between worlds is thin. A place where I can show you the past. The Whispering Woods." Another name from local legend, a place shrouded in mystery and whispered warnings. Briar had always avoided them, instinctively wary of the dense, ancient trees and the unsettling silence that seemed to emanate from within. But tonight, she felt a strange pull, a sense of coming home. Without a word, He turned and began to walk, moving with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. He didn't wait for her, didn't look back, but she knew, somehow, that he expected her to follow. And she did. She fell into step behind him, her boots sinking into the muddy ground, the rain plastering her clothes to her skin. The wind howled through the trees, creating a symphony of rustling leaves and creaking branches, a sound that both unnerved and exhilarated her. The whispering woods lived up to their name, the wind seeming to carry voices, whispers of forgotten stories, of ancient secrets. As they walked deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller, thicker, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dense canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. The air grew colder, heavier, laden with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and that ever-present, wild scent that emanated from the man ahead of her. She still didn't know his name. It seemed absurd to be following a stranger, a werewolf, into the heart of a haunted forest, without even knowing his name. "Well, what should I call you?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the stillness. He paused, turning slightly, his golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, as if choosing his words carefully. "Kaelin," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the very trees around them. "My name is Kaelin." Kaelin. It was a name that suited him, a name that sounded both ancient and beautiful. It was a name that sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of something else. Something she couldn't quite define. They continued to walk in silence, the only sounds the rustling of the leaves, the creaking of the branches, and the steady rhythm of their own footsteps. Briar found herself studying Kaelin's back, the way his muscles moved beneath his coat, the way he seemed to glide through the undergrowth, as if he were part of the forest itself. He was a creature of the wild, of the shadows, and yet there was a grace, a nobility about him that belied his monstrous nature. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached a clearing. It was a small, circular space, surrounded by ancient, gnarled trees that seemed to lean inwards, as if guarding a sacred place. In the center of the clearing was a large, flat stone, covered in moss and lichen. The air here felt different, charged with an almost palpable energy. It was a place of power, a place where the veil between worlds was indeed thin. Kaelin stopped at the edge of the clearing, turning to face her. The rain had lessened, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of moon, casting an ethereal glow over the scene. "This is it," he said, his voice hushed, reverent. "This is where I can show you." He gestured towards the stone. "Sit," he said. "And trust me." Trust. It was a big ask given the circumstances. But as she looked into his eyes, eyes that held both the wildness of the wolf and the wisdom of ages, she found herself nodding. She sat on the cold, damp stone, her heart pounding, her senses on high alert. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that her life was about to change forever. The stone beneath her felt oddly warm, and the anticipation built to a nearly unbearable crescendo. Would she truly be ready for what he would reveal? Chapter 4. Echoes of the Past. Kaelin stood before her, the moonlight illuminating his features, casting long, dancing shadows on the moss-covered stone. He looked different somehow. More ethereal, more powerful. The air around him crackled with an unseen energy, a tangible manifestation of the ancient magic that flowed through his veins. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, as if gathering his strength, or perhaps steeling himself for what was to come. When he opened them again, the golden glow was even more intense, burning with an almost unbearable light. "What I am about to show you," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them, "is not a memory, but a reliving. A glimpse into the past, into the events that led to my imprisonment." He raised his hands, his long, elegant fingers tracing intricate patterns in the air. The air shimmered, distorted, like a heat haze rising from the ground. A faint, swirling mist began to coalesce around them, obscuring the trees, the clearing, Everything but the stone on which Briar sat and Kaelin himself. Focus on my voice, he instructed, his tone gentle but firm. Let it guide you. Do not be afraid. Afraid? She was terrified. But she was also fascinated. Drawn in by the mystery, by the promise of understanding, by the undeniable connection she felt to this creature, this man. The mist thickened, swirling faster, becoming a vortex of colors and shapes. Briar felt a strange sensation, a feeling of being pulled, of being unmoored. She closed her eyes, focusing on Kaelin's voice, letting it anchor her to reality. Then slowly the images began to form, not in front of her, but within her, as if she were seeing through someone else's eyes, experiencing someone else's emotions. She saw a village, much like Thornmoor but older. The buildings were made of wood and thatch, the streets were narrow and winding. The air was filled with the sounds of life, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of children, the bleating of sheep. It was a scene of idyllic simplicity, of a community living in harmony with nature. But there was an undercurrent of tension, of fear. The villagers moved with a cautiousness, their eyes darting towards the surrounding forest, as if expecting something or someone. Then she saw him. Kaelin. But younger, wilder, his eyes burning with a fierce, untamed energy. He was dressed in rough, homespun clothes, his hair long and unbound. He was surrounded by others, men and women who shared his striking features, his golden eyes. The Holophong. They were a clan, a family, living apart from the village, yet connected to it. And then she saw her, Alara, a young woman, beautiful and vibrant, with long, flowing hair the color of raven's wings and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief. She was dressed in the same simple clothes as the villagers, but there was an air of otherness about her, a hint of magic in her smile. She was the one who would weave the curse. Briar's ancestor. The scene shifted. She saw Kaelin and Alara meeting in secret, in the very clearing where Briar now sat. They were lovers, their passion for each other evident in every touch, every glance. Their love was forbidden, a dangerous transgression against the unspoken rules that separated the Holophong from the villagers. She saw the growing fear, the prejudice, the whispers of witchcraft and shape-shifting. She saw the villagers turning against the Holophong, fueled by fear and superstition. She saw the betrayal, the trap, the desperate fight. And then she saw the curse. Alara, cornered, desperate, her heart broken by Kaelin's apparent betrayal, a misunderstanding fueled by the fear and manipulation of others, uttered the words that would bind him, imprison him, for a century. The words were spoken in an ancient tongue, a language Briar didn't understand, yet she felt their power, their devastating impact. She saw Kaelin's anguish, his horror, as he felt his body changing, his humanity slipping away, replaced by the primal rage of the wolf. She saw him trapped, not in his wolf form, but between forms, a prisoner in his own body, unable to fully shift, unable to fully die. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Briar gasping for breath, her body trembling, her heart aching with a grief that was not entirely her own. She was back in the clearing, the mist gone, the only light the pale glow of the moon. Kaelin stood before her, his face etched with sorrow, his golden eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. He looked exhausted, drained by the effort of showing her the past. "I saw," Briar whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I felt it. Alara, she didn't know. She thought I had betrayed her," Kaelin finished, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries of regret. "She was manipulated, used as a weapon against me, against my clan." He knelt before her, his gaze searching hers. "Do you understand now, Briar? Do you understand the connection? The curse it is in your blood. You are the key to breaking it." He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, but not quite touching. "Will you help me?" he asked, his voice a raw, desperate plea. It was a question that hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the past, the promise of the future, and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of redemption. The answer was already forming, an echo of Alara's pain and Kaelin's suffering, a whisper from her own soul. Chapter 5. A Pact Forged in Fear. The weight of his question pressed down on Briar, heavy as the ancient stones surrounding them. Will you help me? It wasn't a simple request, it was an entreaty to unravel a century-old curse, to confront the prejudices of a town steeped in fear, and to embrace a destiny she never knew existed. She looked at Kaelin, really looked at him, seeing past the monstrous legend, past the glowing eyes and the primal scent, to the man trapped within. She saw the pain, the loneliness, the yearning for freedom that mirrored her own yearning for something more. She saw the echo of Alara's love, twisted and broken by betrayal, but still flickering faintly in the depths of his golden eyes. "How?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the single word encompassing all her doubts, her fears, and her nascent hope. Kaelin straightened slightly, his posture shifting from one of supplication to one of determination. The curse was bound by Alara's blood, by her will, he explained. It can only be undone by the same. By your blood, your will. He reached into the pocket of his heavy coat and produced a small, silver dagger. It was intricately crafted, the hilt adorned with a single, blood-red stone that pulsed with a faint, inner light. It was an object of beauty and danger, a symbol of the power that flowed through his bloodline, and now, through hers. Briar's breath hitched. She was no stranger to sharp objects. Her years spent tending a garden had made her familiar with pruning shears and knives. But this was different. This was a weapon imbued with magic, with the power to bind and to break. What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The lock," Kaelin said, his gaze fixed on the dagger. "The silver band that bears your name. It must be unsealed. With your blood." He held out the dagger to her, hilt first. The silver gleamed in the moonlight, reflecting the pale light and the surrounding darkness. It was a choice, a tangible representation of the path she was about to embark on. Briar hesitated. The thought of deliberately drawing her own blood, of willingly participating in a ritual that smacked of witchcraft and ancient magic, was terrifying. But she couldn't ignore the pull, the sense of obligation that she felt towards Kaelin, towards Alara, towards the tangled history that bound them together. She reached out, her fingers wrapping around the cold, smooth hilt of the dagger. The silver felt strangely alive, pulsing with a faint warmth that seemed to resonate with her own heartbeat. "There's more, isn't there?" she said, looking at Kaelin, her gaze unwavering. She sensed that he was holding something back, that there was more to this ritual than he was letting on. He nodded, his expression grim. "The curse, it is not merely a physical binding," he explained. "It is also a spiritual one. When you unseal the lock, you will be exposed to the full force of the curse, to the wolf." He hesitated, his golden eyes searching hers, as if gauging her reaction, her understanding. "There is a risk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A risk that the wolf will overwhelm you, that you will lose yourself." Lose herself? To what? To the primal rage that she had glimpsed in Kaelin's past? To the beast that lurked within him, within her? The thought was terrifying, yet intriguing. There was a part of her, a wild, untamed part, that she had kept suppressed for years, a part that yearned for release, for freedom. Was this what it meant to be connected? To be whole? And, if I can't control it? She asked, her voice barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. Then Kaelin paused, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Then I will be free, but you will be lost." It was a stark choice. Freedom for him, at the potential cost of her own sanity, her own self. It was a sacrifice that seemed impossible. And yet, as she looked at him, at the hope flickering in his eyes, a hope that was tempered by a deep, abiding fear for her, she knew what she had to do. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm, resolute. The words surprised even her, but they felt right. They felt like the culmination of all the choices she had made in her life, all the losses she had endured, all the yearnings she had suppressed. Kaelin's eyes widened, his expression a mixture of relief and awe. He reached out, his hand covering hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of energy through her body. "Briar," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are braver than you know." He squeezed her hand, a silent promise of support, of protection. He would be there, he would guide her, he would fight for her, even if she couldn't fight for herself. They stood there, in the heart of the whispering woods, the moonlight casting long, dancing shadows around them, two souls bound by a curse, by a destiny, by a love that transcended time and space. They were ready, or as ready as they could ever be, with the wild calling to them and the ancient stone of the church waiting. The question was, would the town be ready for them? Chapter 6. The Scent of Rain and Pine. The journey back to the church was a blur, a silent trek through the moonlit woods, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth and fallen leaves. Briar's mind raced, a whirlwind of fear, anticipation, and a strange, nascent excitement. She clutched the silver dagger, its cold weight a constant reminder of the task ahead, of the risk she was about to take. Kalen walked beside her, his presence a comforting reassurance. He didn't speak, but she could feel his gaze on her, a silent offering of support, of understanding. The wild scent that emanated from him, the scent of the forest, of rain and pine, was stronger now, almost overwhelming. It was a scent that both terrified and intrigued her, a scent that spoke of a world beyond her comprehension, a world she was about to enter. As they emerged from the woods, the imposing silhouette of St. Michael's loomed before them, its Gothic architecture stark against the night sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cleansed, crisp air and a sky full of stars. The moon, now full and bright, cast an ethereal glow over the scene, illuminating the ancient stones and the weathered gargoyles that seemed to watch their every move. The small side entrance to the crypt was still ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. Briar hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. There was no turning back. Kalen placed a hand on her arm, his touch gentle but firm. "Are you ready?" he asked, his golden eyes searching hers. She took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. "As I'll ever be," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. He nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. He didn't offer words of encouragement, of reassurance. He simply understood. He knew the fear that gripped her, the doubt that gnawed at her. He had lived with it for a century. They approached the door, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The faint scent of damp earth and that lingering, metallic tang of the crypt wafted out, mingling with Kalen's own wild scent. Briar reached out, her fingers tracing the cold, rough-hewn wood of the door. She found the silver band, the lock that bore her name, the archaic script gleaming faintly in the moonlight. It pulsed with a faint, inner light, a tangible manifestation of the magic that bound it, that bound him. She looked at Kalen, her gaze questioning. He nodded, his expression grim but resolute.
He knew what she was asking.
Now, she took another deep breath, her hand tightening around the hilt of the dagger. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the image of Alara, on the love and the betrayal that had led to this moment. She thought of Thomas, her late husband, and the quiet, comfortable life they had shared. She thought of the emptiness that had followed his death, the yearning for something more. And then, she opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the lock. She raised the dagger, the silver blade glinting in the moonlight. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Then, with a swift, decisive movement, she pressed the tip of the blade against her palm. The pain was sharp, immediate, but she didn't flinch. She watched as a single drop of blood welled up, a crimson bead that glistened in the moonlight. She touched the blood-stained blade to the lock, to her name, to the silver band. The metal hissed, a faint, almost inaudible sound. The air crackled with energy. A wave of heat washed over her, a sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She felt a shift, a change, within her. Something awakened. Something wild, untamed, primal. It was a feeling of power, of freedom, but also of danger. She could feel the wolf, lurking just beneath the surface, its presence a tangible force that threatened to overwhelm her. Kalen was watching her, his golden eyes wide, alert. He was ready, poised to intervene if necessary. He was her anchor, her connection to reality, to her humanity. She gasped, her body trembling, her vision blurring. The world seemed to tilt, to spin. She could feel the curse breaking, unraveling, releasing its hold on Kalen, on her. But it was also fighting back, trying to claim her, to consume her. It felt ancient, raw, and powerful, a sensation she'd never experienced. Hold on, Briar. Kalen's voice was urgent, a lifeline in the swirling chaos of her senses. Focus on me. Focus on my voice. She struggled to obey, to anchor herself to his voice, to his presence. She could feel the wolf rising, clawing its way to the surface. It was a battle for control, a battle for her soul. And she was losing. Or so she thought, until the image of Kalen, chained and suffering, flashed before her eyes. That strengthened something deep inside. But would it be enough? Chapter 7. Unveiling the Holophong. The world fractured into a kaleidoscope of sensation, the searing pain in her palm, the metallic tang of blood, the overwhelming scent of rain and pine, and the raw, untamed power surging through her veins. The wolf was a tempest, a wild, chaotic force threatening to tear her apart from the inside out. She felt her bones shifting, her muscles contorting, her senses sharpening to an almost unbearable degree. Kalen's voice was a distant echo, a fading beacon in the storm raging within her. She clung to it, desperately, fighting to maintain a sliver of control, a fragment of her humanity. But the wolf was strong, relentless, fueled by a century of pent-up rage and frustration. She stumbled, her knees buckling beneath her. Kalen caught her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. His touch was a grounding force, a reminder of who she was fighting for. "Briar," he shouted, his voice strained, desperate. "Fight it. You are stronger than you think." She could feel his body trembling, his own wolf reacting to her transformation, to the release of the ancient magic. He was battling his own demons, struggling to maintain his control, even as he fought to save her. She looked at him, her vision blurring, her eyes flickering between their normal brown and a startling, luminous gold. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear for her, but also something else.
Hope. Belief.
"I can't," she gasped, her voice raspy, distorted, almost inhuman. "Yes, you can," he insisted, his grip tightening around her. "You are Alara's descendant. You have her strength, her power. Use it." Alara. The name resonated within her, a spark of recognition, a surge of something. It was a memory, a feeling, a connection to the past, to the woman who had wielded this power before her. She closed her eyes, focusing on that connection, on that memory, on that love. She remembered the vision, the image of Alara and Kalen, their forbidden passion, their tragic fate. She felt Alara's grief, her regret, her desperate desire for redemption. And she realized she wasn't just fighting the wolf. She was fighting the curse. She was fighting the fear, the prejudice, the hatred that had fueled it for a century. She opened her eyes, her gaze locking with Kalen's. The golden glow was fading, replaced by a fierce, determined light. She was still trembling, her body still shifting, but she was in control.
For now.
"The curse," she said, her voice still raspy, but stronger now, more human.
It's not just about you.
It's about all of us." Kalen nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Yes," he said. "It is about breaking the cycle of fear, of hatred, of separation." He released her, slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might shatter. She stood on her own, her legs shaky but firm. The transformation had stopped, receding like a tide, leaving behind a lingering sense of wildness, a heightened awareness of her surroundings, of the scents and sounds of the night. The door to the crypt swung open fully, silently, revealing the darkness within. The metallic scent was stronger now, almost overpowering. But there was something else, too. A sense of peace, of release. Kalen stepped forward, his silhouette framed against the darkness. He turned to her, his golden eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "It is done," he said, his voice a low rumble, filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. The curse was broken.
He was free.
But the look on his face, the way he held himself, suggested that the freedom was bittersweet. A century of imprisonment had left its mark, a deep, abiding loneliness that even the breaking of the curse couldn't fully erase. Briar reached out, her hand touching his arm. The contact sent a jolt of energy through her, a connection that was both familiar and new. She could feel the wolf, still present within him, but tamed, controlled. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. He nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. "I am free," he said, his voice echoing the emptiness within him. "But it will take time." He looked at her then, his gaze intense, searching. "And you?" he asked. "How do you feel?" She took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the cool night air. The wildness was still there, a hum beneath her skin, a heightened awareness of the world around her. But it wasn't overwhelming. It was part of her. I don't know," she said, honestly.
Different. Changed.
But not lost. A faint smile touched his lips.
"Good," he said.
"That is good." They stood there, in the silence of the night, two souls forever altered by the events that had transpired. The curse was broken, the hollow fong was unveiled, but the journey, the true journey, was just beginning. The town, shrouded in darkness beyond the church walls, remained unaware. The true test was yet to come. Chapter 8. Beneath the crimson moon. A strange calm settled over them, a stillness that felt both profound and unsettling. The air, cleansed by the earlier storm, was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the lingering metallic tang of the crypt. The full moon, a silver disk in the inky sky, cast long, dancing shadows that stretched and twisted around them. Kalen turned towards the village, his gaze sweeping over the rooftops, the darkened windows, the silent streets. He seemed to be listening, sensing something beyond Briar's perception. "They will know," he said, his voice a low rumble, barely audible above the whisper of the wind. "They will feel the shift, the change in the balance." Briar followed his gaze. Thornmoor looked peaceful, undisturbed. But she knew, from the whispered tales and averted gazes she'd encountered over the years, that the town held its secrets close, that the fear of the hollow fong, however dormant, still lingered in the collective memory. "What will they do?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Kalen shrugged, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. "They will react as they always have," he said. "With fear. With prejudice. With violence, perhaps." He turned back to her, his golden eyes searching hers. "We must be careful," he said. "We must be prepared." Prepared for what? For a confrontation? For a battle? The thought was terrifying, yet exhilarating. She had spent her life avoiding conflict, seeking peace and quiet, but now she found herself drawn to the danger, to the challenge. She was no longer the same woman who had walked past this church just hours ago. She was something more. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Kalen considered for a moment, his gaze thoughtful, his expression unreadable. "We wait," he said finally. "We observe. We learn." He looked at her then, a faint smile touching his lips. "And we explore," he added, his voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. Explore? What did he mean? The possibilities swirled in her mind, a mix of fear and anticipation. He gestured towards the village.
"Come," he said.
"Let us walk. Let us see." He offered her his arm, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and charming. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding against her ribs. This was a new world, a new reality, and she was walking into it with a creature of legend, a man who was both terrifying and irresistibly compelling. She took his arm, her fingers brushing against the rough wool of his coat. The contact sent a jolt of energy through her, a connection that was both familiar and new. She could feel the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the underlying power that simmered beneath his skin. They walked, slowly, deliberately, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. They walked through the deserted streets of Thornmoor, past the darkened houses, the closed shops, the familiar landmarks that now seemed different, imbued with a new significance. As they walked, Briar found herself studying Callan, his profile etched against the moonlight. He was strikingly handsome, his features sharp and defined, his expression thoughtful, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. He moved with a fluid grace, a silent power, that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. "Tell me," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "Tell me about your life. Before the curse." He glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "It was a long time ago," he said, "but I remember fragments."
Moments.
He began to speak, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. He spoke of his clan, the Holophong, of their life in the Whispering Woods, of their connection to nature, to the moon, to the wolf. He spoke of their traditions, their rituals, their beliefs. He spoke of Alara, his voice softening, his eyes filling with a mixture of love and regret. He spoke of their forbidden romance, of their passion, of their betrayal. He spoke of the curse, of the pain, the loneliness, the isolation. He spoke of the century he had spent trapped, suspended between worlds, a prisoner in his own body. As he spoke, Briar listened, her heart aching with empathy, with understanding. She realized that he was not just a creature of legend, a monster from a nightmare. He was a man with a past, with a story, with feelings. They reached the edge of the village, the boundary between civilization and the wild. The moon, now directly overhead, bathed the landscape in a silvery light. And then Briar noticed something. A subtle shift in the color of the moon, a faint, reddish tinge that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. "Callan," she said, her voice urgent, her hand tightening on his arm.
"Look."
The moon he followed her gaze, his eyes widening, his expression shifting from one of thoughtful contemplation to one of alarm. "The crimson moon," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind. "It is a sign, a warning." "A warning of what?" Before Briar could ask, a howl pierced the night, a long, mournful cry that echoed through the silent streets. It was a sound that sent a shiver down her spine, a sound that spoke of danger, of change. It was not Callan's howl. It was a different, more savage sound. Chapter 9. The Weight of Ancient Bonds. The howl hung in the air, a chilling vibration that seemed to penetrate Briar's very bones. It wasn't just the sound itself, but the quality of it, a raw, untamed savagery that spoke of something ancient, something uncontrolled. It was a stark contrast to the measured, almost melancholic resonance of Callan's own voice, his own wolf-like presence. Callan stiffened, his body going rigid, his hand instinctively reaching for the place where a weapon might have been, had he been carrying one. His golden eyes, usually filled with a complex mixture of sadness and hope, now burned with a fierce, protective light. "Another," he murmured, his voice low and tight, his gaze fixed on the direction of the howl the Whispering Woods. "One who is not bound." Briar's mind raced. She had assumed, naively perhaps, that Callan was the only werewolf in Thornmoor, the sole subject of the Holophong curse. But the howl, this new, terrifying sound, shattered that illusion. "There are others?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Callan nodded, his expression grim. "The curse affected the entire bloodline," he explained. "But not all were imprisoned as I was. Some escaped. Some adapted." "Adapted? To what?" To living as wolves? To hiding in the shadows? To hunting? The thought sent a shiver of fear down her spine.
How many?
She asked, her voice trembling slightly. He shrugged, a slight, almost imperceptible movement.
I do not know, he said.
It has been a century. Much has changed. He turned to her, his gaze intense, searching. We must be careful, he said. We are not safe here. Not anymore. He looked back towards the village, his eyes narrowed, as if assessing the threat. The houses remained dark, silent, seemingly oblivious to the danger that lurked just beyond their walls. But Briar knew, from the stories, from the fear that permeated the town's history, that Thornmoor was not as innocent as it appeared. Where do we go? She asked, her voice filled with a mixture of apprehension and a strange, nascent excitement. She was terrified, yes, but she was also alive. More alive than she had felt in years. Kaelin considered for a moment, his gaze thoughtful, his expression unreadable. There is a place, he said finally, an old sanctuary, a place where my ancestors gathered. It is hidden deep within the woods. He hesitated, his golden eyes searching hers. It is dangerous, he said, but it is safer than here. Safer than facing a town that might turn against them, a town that might harbor other werewolves, creatures who might not be as controlled as Kaelin. The choice was clear. Let's go, she said, her voice firm, resolute. She trusted him. She had to. He nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of energy through her body. It was a connection, a bond, that was both terrifying and reassuring. They turned and walked, swiftly, silently, back towards the whispering woods, the crimson moon hanging heavy in the sky, casting a blood-red glow over the landscape. The howl came again, closer this time, more urgent, more threatening. As they entered the woods, the trees seemed to close in around them, enveloping them in shadows, in silence. The air grew colder, heavier, laden with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and that ever-present, wild scent that emanated from Kaelin. Briar found herself clinging to Kaelin's hand, her senses on high alert, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer the quiet, unassuming widow she had been just hours ago. She was something else. Something stronger, something wilder, something connected. She was bound to Kaelin, to the Holophong, to the ancient curse, to the destiny that had been thrust upon her. She was walking into a new world, a dangerous world, a world of shadows and moonlight, of werewolves and ancient magic. She was afraid, yes, but she was also ready. Ready to face whatever lay ahead, ready to fight for her survival, for Kaelin's freedom, for their future. A future that was uncertain, unpredictable, but also filled with possibility. The weight of the ancient bonds pressed upon her, a tangible force, but it also felt empowering. She was part of something bigger, something older, something powerful. The question remained, was this power a gift, or another, more insidious curse? The howl echoed again, closer still, and she knew the answer would come soon. Chapter 10. Whispers of a Forbidden Love. The deeper they ventured into the whispering woods, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees, ancient and gnarled, seemed to lean in, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dense canopy that blocked out even the crimson moonlight. The air was thick with a scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the ever-present, musky aroma of Kaelin's wolf-like nature, now heightened by the proximity of the other, unseen werewolf. Briar clung to Kaelin's hand, her senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through her, a primal instinct warning her of danger. But there was also a strange sense of familiarity, a feeling of being home, in a way she had never felt in the sterile, predictable confines of Thornmoor. Kaelin moved with a silent grace, a fluid power that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. He seemed to know the woods intimately, navigating the tangled paths and hidden trails with an ease that spoke of centuries of experience. He was a creature of this place, of the shadows, of the wild, and Briar, despite her fear, found herself drawn to that wildness, to that connection. They walked in silence for a long time, the only sounds the soft thud of their footsteps and the occasional distant howl, a constant reminder of the unseen threat that lurked nearby. Briar's mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened, everything that was happening. She was still grappling with the reality of werewolves, of ancient curses, of her own newfound abilities. Finally, she couldn't stand the silence any longer. "Kaelin," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That other werewolf, who is it?"
What does it want?
Kaelin didn't answer immediately. He continued to walk, his gaze fixed on the path ahead, his senses alert to any sign of danger. Then he sighed, a low, almost inaudible sound. "I do not know," he admitted. "It has been a century. Many of my clan scattered. Some embraced the wolf. Some lost themselves." He glanced at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. "There was one," he said, his voice hesitant, his tone heavy with unspoken emotion. "My brother, Rorik. He was strong, powerful, but also unstable. He craved power, dominance. He resented the curse, but he also relished the power it gave him." Rorik. The name sent a shiver down Briar's spine. It sounded dangerous, brutal. "You think it's him?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kaelin shrugged, a slight, almost imperceptible movement.
"It is possible," he said.
"The howl, it has a similar resonance. But it is also different."
"Changed."
"Changed how? By time? By the curse? By something else?" The questions swirled in Briar's mind, unanswered, unsettling. They continued to walk, the silence stretching out again, heavy with unspoken fears, with unanswered questions. But there was also something else, a growing awareness of each other, a subtle shift in their dynamic. Briar found herself studying Kaelin, his profile etched against the faint light that filtered through the trees. He was strikingly handsome, his features sharp and defined, his expression thoughtful, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. But it was more than just his physical appearance that drew her to him. It was his presence, his quiet strength, his underlying vulnerability. She remembered the vision, the image of Kaelin and Alara, their forbidden love, their tragic fate. She felt a pang of sympathy, of understanding. She knew what it was like to lose someone you loved, to yearn for a connection that was forbidden, impossible. And she realized, with a sudden jolt of awareness, that she was attracted to him, to Kaelin, to the man, to the wolf, to the creature of legend who walked beside her, his hand holding hers, his fate intertwined with her own. It was a ridiculous thought, a dangerous thought, a thought she immediately tried to suppress. He was a werewolf, a creature of the wild, of the shadows. She was she wasn't quite sure what she was anymore, but she was certainly not someone who should be entertaining romantic feelings for a creature of legend. But the feeling persisted, a subtle hum beneath her skin, a warmth that spread through her body, a yearning that she couldn't quite ignore. It was a feeling that was both terrifying and exhilarating. As if sensing her thoughts, Kaelin glanced at her, his golden eyes meeting hers. There was a question in his gaze, a vulnerability, a hope. He didn't speak, but she knew, somehow, that he felt it too. The connection, the attraction, the forbidden love that was beginning to blossom between them, in the heart of the whispering woods, beneath the crimson moon. It was a whisper, a secret, a fragile thing, threatened by the danger that surrounded them, by the ancient curse that still bound them, by the unseen werewolf that howled in the distance. But it was there, undeniable, and growing stronger with each passing moment. The danger was palpable, but so was this new, budding emotion. Chapter 11. The Price of Freedom. The unspoken acknowledgement of their mutual attraction hung heavy in the air, a fragile, shimmering thing amidst the oppressive darkness of the woods. It was a dangerous complication, a distraction they could ill afford, yet neither of them could deny the pull, the undeniable connection that had blossomed between them. They continued to walk, their pace quickening, driven by the urgency of their situation and the increasingly frequent howls that echoed through the trees. Kalen led the way, his senses on high alert, his body poised for action. He was a predator in his element, a creature of the night, and Briar, despite her fear, found herself trusting his instincts, his ability to protect her. "We're close," he said, his voice a low murmur, barely audible above the rustling of leaves and the distant howls. "The sanctuary, it is just ahead." He gestured towards a narrow, almost invisible trail that veered off the main path, disappearing into a thicket of thorny bushes and gnarled trees. It looked impassable, unwelcoming, but Kalen moved towards it with a confidence that reassured her. He pushed aside the branches, creating a small opening, and beckoned her to follow. Briar hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding against her ribs. This was it. They were stepping into the unknown, into a place of ancient power, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. She took a deep breath and followed him, ducking under the low-hanging branches, her clothes snagging on the thorns. The air grew colder, heavier, laden with a strange, almost palpable energy. It was a feeling of ancientness, of power, of waiting. They emerged into a small clearing, hidden from the world by the dense surrounding trees. In the center of the clearing was a circle of standing stones, weathered and worn, covered in moss and lichen. The stones seemed to hum with a faint, inner light, a tangible manifestation of the magic that permeated this place. "This is it," Kalen said, his voice hushed, reverent. "The sanctuary of the Holophong, a place of refuge, of power." He walked towards the center of the circle, his gaze sweeping over the stones, his expression thoughtful, his body radiating a sense of belonging. He was home, in a way he hadn't been for a century. Briar followed him, her senses overwhelmed by the energy of the place. She felt a strange connection to the stones, to the ancient magic, to the history that permeated this clearing. It was a feeling of recognition, of coming home. As she stepped into the circle, she felt a shift, a change within her. The wildness that had awakened in her at the church, the power that had surged through her veins, intensified. She felt stronger, more aware, more connected to the wolf within. Kalen turned to her, his golden eyes gleaming in the faint light that filtered through the trees. "This place, it amplifies our power," he explained. "It strengthens the bond between us and between the wolf." He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. "It can be dangerous," he added. "It can overwhelm." Overwhelm? Briar remembered the struggle she had faced at the church, the battle for control, the fear of losing herself to the wolf. Was this place going to make it worse? But there was also something else, a sense of excitement, of anticipation. She was no longer the same woman who had lived a quiet, predictable life in Thornmoor. She was something more, and she was ready to explore that, to embrace that, to understand that. I understand," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Kalen nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, but not quite touching. "There is one more thing," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The price of freedom, it is not always easy." He looked at her then, his gaze intense, searching. "The curse, it was broken, but it also changed us. It awakened something within us. Something powerful. Something wild." He hesitated, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of regret and acceptance.
"We're different now," he said.
"We are connected to the wolf, to the moon, to the wild. We can never go back to who we were. Never go back to her quiet, predictable life, to her grief, her loneliness, her emptiness." The thought was both terrifying and liberating. She looked at him, at the man, at the wolf, at the creature of legend who stood before her, his fate intertwined with her own. She saw the pain, the loneliness, the yearning for connection that mirrored her own. And she realized she didn't want to go back. She wanted to move forward, to explore this new world, this new reality, this new connection. Even if it was dangerous, even if it was uncertain, even if it meant embracing the wolf within. She reached out, her hand touching his, her fingers intertwining with his own. The contact sent a jolt of energy through her, a connection that was both familiar and new. "I know," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "And I'm ready." Ready for whatever lay ahead, ready to face the challenges, the dangers, the possibilities. Ready to embrace the price of freedom, the weight of ancient bonds, the whispers of a forbidden love. But as she looked at Kaelin, she heard another distant howl, closer this time, and a chill reminded her that ready might not be enough. Chapter 12. Scars of the Soul. The howl shattered the fragile peace of the sanctuary, a raw, guttural sound that vibrated through the ancient stones and sent a shiver of primal fear down Briar's spine. It was closer now, much closer, and filled with a menacing intent that left no doubt about the danger they faced. Kaelin stiffened, his body going rigid, his hand instinctively tightening around Briar's. His golden eyes, usually filled with a complex mixture of emotions, now burned with a fierce, protective light. He was a predator on high alert, ready to defend his territory, his mate. "Rorik," he murmured, his voice low and tight, the name a curse and a lament. "He is here." Briar's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and anticipation. She had heard the name before, whispered by Kaelin in the depths of the Whispering Woods' brother, the one who had embraced the wolf, the one who craved power, the one who represented a very real and immediate threat. What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, despite her earlier resolve. Kaelin didn't answer immediately. He scanned the clearing, his senses on high alert, his gaze sweeping over the surrounding trees, searching for any sign of movement, any indication of Rorik's approach. "We fight," he said finally, his voice grim, resolute. "We defend ourselves. We survive." Fight? Briar had never fought anyone in her life, let alone a werewolf, a creature of immense power and ferocity. But she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she wouldn't run. She wouldn't abandon Kaelin. She would stand by his side and face whatever came. She straightened her shoulders, her grip tightening on Kaelin's hand. The wildness within her, the power that had awakened at the church and intensified in the sanctuary, surged through her veins. She felt stronger, more aware, more connected to the wolf within. "I'm ready," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Kaelin looked at her, his golden eyes searching hers. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw the determination, the courage, the fierceness that had blossomed within her. He saw the woman she was becoming, the woman she was meant to be. He nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. He released her hand, slowly, carefully, as if reluctant to break the connection. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and urgent. "And trust your instincts." Trust her instincts? Her instincts were telling her to run, to hide, to escape. But she knew she couldn't. She had to trust the wolf, the power that flowed through her, the connection she shared with Kaelin. And then he appeared. Rorik. He stepped out from the shadows of the trees, his figure silhouetted against the faint light that filtered through the branches. He was tall, like Kaelin, but broader, more muscular, his body radiating a raw, untamed power. His hair was long and wild, his eyes they burned with a crimson light, a reflection of the moon overhead, a sign of his uncontrolled rage. He looked at Kaelin, his lips curling into a sneer, his expression a mixture of contempt and envy. "Brother," he said, his voice a low, guttural growl, the word dripping with sarcasm and malice. "I see you have broken free. And brought a pet with you." He looked at Briar then, his crimson eyes sweeping over her, assessing, judging. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw something else. Something that intrigued him. "A human," he said, his voice filled with amusement and disdain. "How quaint. You always did have a weakness for them." Kaelin didn't respond. He stood his ground, his body poised for action, his golden eyes fixed on Rorik, his expression unreadable. "The curse," Rorik continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You broke it. You weakened us. Weaken them? Briar didn't understand. How could breaking the curse, freeing Kaelin, have weakened Rorik? The power, Rorik said, as if reading her thoughts.
It was concentrated. In you.
Now it is dispersed. Diluted. I will take it back, Kaelin. I will be the one to rule. He lunged, suddenly, swiftly, his movements blurring with speed. He was a blur of motion, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, aiming straight for Kaelin. The battle had begun. And the scars, Briar realized, were not just on Kaelin's soul, but on Rorik's, twisted and festering from a century of rage. This fight was not just about power, it was about old wounds. Chapter 13. A gathering storm. The clash was instantaneous, brutal. The clearing, moments before filled with a tense silence, erupted into a cacophony of snarls, growls, and the sickening thud of flesh against flesh. Rorik, fueled by a century of resentment and untamed rage, attacked with a savage ferocity, his crimson eyes burning with a bloodthirsty light. He was a whirlwind of claws and teeth, a predator intent on destruction. Kaelin, though initially taken aback by the suddenness of the attack, met his brother's fury with a defensive grace, parrying blows, dodging attacks, his movements fluid and precise. He was fighting not to kill, but to survive, to protect Briar, to contain the chaos that Rorik unleashed. Briar watched, frozen in place, her heart pounding against her ribs, her senses overwhelmed by the violence unfolding before her. She had never witnessed anything like this raw, primal display of power, this brutal struggle for dominance. She wanted to run, to hide, but she knew she couldn't. She had to stay, to help Kaelin, to fight. The wildness within her, the power that had awakened at the church and intensified in the sanctuary, surged through her veins. She felt her senses sharpening, her reflexes quickening, her body changing. She could feel the wolf, closer to the surface now, its presence a tangible force that both terrified and empowered her. She saw Rorik land a blow, his claws raking across Kaelin's arm, drawing blood. Kaelin staggered, his face contorted in pain, but he didn't fall. He retaliated with a swift kick, sending Rorik sprawling backwards. But Rorik recovered quickly, leaping to his feet, his eyes blazing with fury. "You are weak, brother," he roared, his voice echoing through the clearing. "You have been softened by your human. You have forgotten the power of the wolf." He lunged again, this time aiming for Kaelin's throat. Briar knew she had to act, to intervene, to protect the man, the wolf, she had come to care for. She didn't think, she simply reacted. She moved, faster than she ever thought possible, her body fueled by adrenaline and the primal power of the wolf. She stepped between Kaelin and Rorik, her hands raised, her eyes flickering with a nascent golden light. A force, invisible yet tangible, erupted from her, a wave of energy that slammed into Rorik, sending him flying backwards, crashing into one of the standing stones. The clearing fell silent, the only sounds the ragged breathing of the three figures and the crackling energy that still lingered in the air. Rorik lay stunned, his body sprawled against the ancient stone, his crimson eyes wide with disbelief. Kaelin stared at Briar, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of awe and concern. He had known she was powerful, that she had the potential to break the curse, but he had never seen her wield that power so directly, so effectively. Briar herself was trembling, her body shaking with the aftereffects of the surge of energy. She had done it. She had protected Kaelin. She had fought. She looked at her hands, her fingers still tingling with the residual power. She was changing. She was becoming something else. Something more than human, something more than ordinary. Rorik rose slowly, painfully, his body bruised and battered, but his eyes still burning with a fierce, undiminished rage. He looked at Briar, his lips curling into a sneer. "So," he said, his voice raspy, his tone filled with contempt. "The human has teeth. You have chosen your side, which now face the storm." He turned his gaze back to Kaelin, his expression hardening. "This is not over, brother," he snarled. I will have what is rightfully mine. I will have the power. And I will destroy you both. He vanished into the shadows of the trees, his form disappearing as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the echo of his threat and the lingering scent of his rage. Kaelin rushed to Briar's side, his hands gently cupping her face, his golden eyes searching hers. Are you all right? He asked, his voice filled with concern. She nodded, her head still spinning, her body still trembling. I think so, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his gaze intense, his expression a mixture of admiration and fear. He had seen the power she possessed, the power she was still learning to control. He knew that she was dangerous. But he also knew that she was his only hope. The storm Rorik promised was gathering, both literally and figuratively. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, carrying the scent of rain and blood. The crimson moon, still hanging heavy in the sky, seemed to pulse with a malevolent light. They were not safe, not yet. The fight was far from over. But as Kaelin held her, she felt a glimmer of something beyond fear. Determination. Chapter 14. The hunt begins. The sanctuary, once a place of refuge and power, now felt like a cage, exposed and vulnerable. The lingering scent of Rorik's rage, the echo of his threat, hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Kaelin helped Briar to her feet, his touch gentle but firm, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of concern and determination. He knew that they couldn't stay here, that Rorik would be back, stronger, more prepared, perhaps with allies. We have to leave, he said, his voice low and urgent. We have to find a safer place. Safer place? Where? Briar's mind raced, trying to think of somewhere, anywhere, they could go, where they could be safe from Rorik's wrath. But Thornmoor was out of the question, and the Whispering Woods, once Kaelin's home, were now Rorik's hunting ground. Where do we go? She asked, her voice trembling slightly, her heart pounding against her ribs. Kaelin considered for a moment, his gaze thoughtful, his expression unreadable. He was weighing their options, calculating the risks, trying to find a solution, a way to protect them both. There is one place, he said finally, his voice hesitant, his tone heavy with unspoken emotion. A place beyond the woods. Beyond Thornmoor. A place where others like us have sought refuge. Others like them? Werewolves? Briar had assumed that Kaelin and Rorik were the only ones, the last remnants of the Hollowfang bloodline. But the thought of a community, a place where they might find allies, where they might be safe, filled her with a flicker of hope. Where? She asked, her voice filled with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. The Silverwood, Kaelin said, the name a whisper, a legend, a promise. It is far, dangerous to reach, but it is our best hope. The Silverwood. Briar had never heard of it, but the name itself conjured images of a place of mystery, of magic, of power. It was a place where they might find refuge, where they might learn to control their powers, where they might prepare for the final confrontation with Rorik. Let's go, she said, her voice firm, resolute. She was afraid, yes, but she was also determined. She wouldn't run and hide. She would face this challenge, this danger, with Kaelin by her side. He nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of energy through her body. It was a connection, a bond, that was both terrifying and reassuring. They left the sanctuary, stepping back into the shadows of the Whispering Woods, the crimson moon hanging heavy in the sky, casting a blood-red glow over the landscape. The hunt had begun. As they walked, Kaelin explained more about the Silverwood. It was a hidden place, a sanctuary for werewolves, for those who had embraced their wolf nature, for those who sought refuge from the fear and prejudice of the human world. It was a place of ancient power, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, a place where they might find allies, where they might learn to control their powers, where they might prepare for the inevitable confrontation with Rorik. But reaching the Silverwood would be perilous. It was located far to the north, beyond the mountains that bordered Thornmoor, a journey that would take them through dangerous territory, through lands inhabited by other creatures, by hunters. Hunters? Briar's heart skipped a beat. Hunters of werewolves? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kalen nodded, his expression grim. There are those, he said, who fear us, who hunt us, who seek to eradicate us. He glanced at her, his golden eyes searching hers. We must be careful, he said. We must be vigilant. We must trust no one. Trust no one? It was a harsh reality, a dangerous world they were entering. But Briar knew that she could trust Kalen. She had to. He was her guide, her protector, her love. The thought surprised her, the sudden realization of the depth of her feelings for him. It was a dangerous complication, a distraction they could ill afford, but she couldn't deny it. She had fallen in love with Kalen, with the man, with the wolf, with the creature of legend who walked beside her, his fate intertwined with her own. As they walked, the first rays of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, chasing away the shadows, diminishing the crimson glow of the moon. The forest, though still dangerous, felt less oppressive, less threatening. But the hunt was far from over. It had only just begun. And Rorik was still out there, somewhere, waiting, planning, his rage a gathering storm that threatened to consume them both. The first sign of daylight brought a sliver of relief, but also a stark reminder of the long journey ahead. Chapter 15. Secrets in the Blood. The journey to the Silverwood was arduous, a relentless trek through dense forests, across treacherous mountains, and along winding, forgotten paths. The days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting of the light, the changing of the landscape, and the constant, underlying tension that permeated their every moment. They moved mostly at night, under the cover of darkness, guided by Kalen's innate sense of direction, his wolf-like instincts leading them through the wilderness. They avoided human settlements, sticking to the shadows, relying on their heightened senses to detect any sign of danger. They hunted for food, Kalen teaching Briar how to track, how to stalk, how to kill. It was a brutal necessity, a stark reminder of the wildness that now flowed through her veins, of the wolf that lurked just beneath the surface. Briar found herself adapting, changing, evolving. She was becoming stronger, faster, more resilient. Her senses were sharper, her reflexes quicker, her body more attuned to the rhythms of nature. She was learning to embrace the wolf within, to control the power that surged through her, to use it. But the transformation wasn't just physical. It was also emotional, spiritual. She was shedding her old self, her old fears, her old limitations. She was becoming something else, something more. And she was falling deeper in love with Kalen. With each passing day, with each shared danger, with each silent exchange of glances, her feelings for him grew stronger, more profound. It was a forbidden love, a dangerous love, a love that defied logic and reason, but it was also real, undeniable, powerful. They spoke little, their communication often limited to gestures, to shared glances, to the unspoken understanding that flowed between them. But in the quiet moments, when they rested, when they huddled together for warmth, Kalen would share fragments of his past, stories of his clan, of his life before the curse, of his brother. He spoke of Rorik with a mixture of sadness, regret, and fear. He described their childhood, their training, their rivalry. He revealed the events that had led to their estrangement, the growing darkness that had consumed Rorik, the insatiable hunger for power that had ultimately led him to embrace the curse, to betray his own blood. He was always stronger, Kalen admitted one night, his voice low and heavy with unspoken emotion. Faster, more aggressive. But he lacked control.
Discipline.
He let the wolf consume him. He looked at Briar then, his golden eyes searching hers. That is the danger, he said. That is the risk. We must control the wolf. We must not let it control us. Briar understood. She had felt the pull, the temptation, the seductive power of the wolf. She had experienced the rage, the bloodlust, the freedom. It was a dangerous path, a slippery slope, and she knew that she had to be careful, vigilant, to maintain her humanity, to not lose herself. One evening, as they were resting by a small, hidden stream, Briar noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible scar on Kaelin's wrist, a thin, silvery line that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. "What's this?" she asked, her fingers gently tracing the mark. Kaelin hesitated, his expression shifting, his gaze avoiding hers. "It is a reminder," he said finally, his voice low and hesitant. "A mark of the curse." He explained that the scar was a physical manifestation of the bond, of the connection between him and Rorik, of the shared bloodline that tied them together, even in their animosity. It was a symbol of their past, of their rivalry, of their fate. "It fades," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "when we are apart, but it intensifies when we are close." He looked at her then, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. "It is a reminder," he said, "that we are connected, that we are bound, by blood, by destiny, by the curse." And he didn't say, but Briar understood, by something more. By a shared history, by a shared pain, by a forbidden love that was beginning to blossom between them, despite the danger, despite the odds, despite the secrets that still lay hidden in their blood. The secrets were coming to light, slowly, painfully, but they were also drawing them closer. Or, perhaps, setting them up for a painful revelation. Chapter 16. Broken Reflections. The closer they got to the Silverwood, the more palpable the tension became. The landscape changed, the dense forests giving way to rolling hills and open meadows, bathed in the silvery light of the moon. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, but also something else. Something wild, untamed, a hint of the presence of other werewolves. Kaelin became more cautious, more vigilant, his senses on high alert. He was constantly scanning their surroundings, listening for any sign of danger, his body poised for action. He was a predator on edge, protecting his territory, his mate. Briar, too, felt the change. The wildness within her, the power that had been steadily growing, intensified. She could feel the presence of other werewolves, a faint hum in the air, a subtle vibration in the ground. It was a feeling of connection, of recognition, but also of apprehension. One night, as they were camped on a high ridge overlooking a vast valley, Briar had a dream. It was vivid, intense, filled with images of wolves running through moonlit forests, of ancient stones and silver trees, of a battle raging between two figures, one bathed in golden light, the other shrouded in crimson shadows. She saw Kaelin, his face contorted in pain, his body battered and bruised. She saw Rorik, his eyes blazing with fury, his claws dripping with blood. She saw herself, standing between them, her hands raised, her body glowing with a powerful, ethereal light. And then she saw something else. Something that shocked her, that terrified her. She saw Alara, her ancestor, the woman who had cursed Kaelin, standing beside Rorik, her expression a mixture of triumph and despair. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding against her ribs, her body covered in a cold sweat. The dream had felt so real, so vivid, so prophetic. Kaelin was instantly awake, his hand reaching for hers, his golden eyes filled with concern. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "What did you see?" Briar hesitated, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the images, of the emotions, of the revelation. She didn't know what to say, how to explain, how to confess. I had a dream," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "About Rorik. About Alara." Kaelin's expression shifted, his gaze hardening, his body going rigid. "Alara?" he said, the name a whisper, a curse, a lament. "What about her?" Briar took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. She had to tell him. She had to reveal the truth, even if it broke him, even if it destroyed them. "She was with him," she said, her voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind. "With Rorik. In the dream. She was helping him." Kaelin stared at her, his golden eyes wide with disbelief, his expression a mixture of shock and pain. "That's impossible," he said, his voice shaking. Alara is dead. She died centuries ago. I know, Briar said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. But I saw her. She was there. She was part of it. Kalen shook his head, his mind reeling, trying to process the information, to reconcile the reality with the impossible. He had spent a century mourning Alara, blaming her for the curse, hating her for her betrayal, yet loving her still. And now this revelation, this twist, this shattering of his reality. He felt as if the ground beneath him was crumbling, that everything he had believed, everything he had held on to, was a lie. He looked at Briar, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of pain and confusion.
Why?
He asked, his voice a raw, desperate plea. Why would she do this? Why would she help him? Briar didn't know. She had no answers, only the images from her dream, the unsettling feeling that there was more to the story, more to the curse, more to Alara's actions than Kalen knew. They sat there, in the silence of the night, the moon casting long, dancing shadows around them, two souls shattered by the revelation, by the broken reflections of the past. The dream had revealed a crack in the foundation of their understanding, a fissure that threatened to widen and consume them both. The truth, it seemed, was far more complicated and far more painful than they had ever imagined. The image of Alara, not as a victim, but as a participant, was a devastating blow. Chapter 17. The Heart's Reckoning. The weight of Briar's revelation settled upon them like a shroud, a heavy, suffocating blanket of doubt and despair. Kalen, his world shattered by the image of Alara, his long-dead lover, siding with his tormentor, retreated into himself, his golden eyes clouded with a pain so profound it was almost palpable. Briar watched him, her heart aching for his suffering, her own mind reeling from the implications of her dream. She wanted to comfort him, to offer him solace, but she knew that words were inadequate, that the wound she had inadvertently inflicted was too deep, too raw, to be healed by simple reassurances. They remained on the ridge, the vast valley spread out before them, bathed in the silvery light of the moon, a silent witness to their turmoil. The air, once crisp and clean, now felt heavy, laden with unspoken questions, with unresolved emotions, with the shattered remnants of their beliefs. Finally, Kalen spoke, his voice a low, ragged whisper, barely audible above the sigh of the wind. "It cannot be true," he said, his words more a desperate plea than a statement of fact. "Alara, she loved me.
She cursed me to save me."
From Rorik. He looked at Briar, his golden eyes searching hers, seeking confirmation, seeking denial. He wanted her to tell him it was just a dream, a nightmare, a figment of her imagination. But Briar couldn't. She had seen it too clearly, felt it too deeply, the image of Alara, not as a victim, but as a participant, a collaborator in Rorik's plans. I don't know," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and uncertainty. "I only know what I saw, and it felt real." Kalen turned away, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, his body trembling with barely suppressed emotion. He was struggling to reconcile the image of Alara, the woman he had loved, the woman he had mourned, with the betrayer she appeared to be in Briar's dream. He remembered their love, their passion, their forbidden romance. He remembered the fear, the prejudice, the hatred that had surrounded them, that had ultimately led to their tragic fate. He remembered the curse, the pain, the loneliness, the isolation. And he remembered the whispers, the rumors, the hints, the suggestions that Alara had not been entirely innocent, that she had manipulated him, that she had used him. He had always dismissed those whispers, those rumors, as the lies of his enemies, as the jealous ravings of those who sought to discredit him, to destroy him. But now, in the light of Briar's dream, those whispers took on a new, terrifying significance. He turned back to Briar, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of pain and a nascent, chilling understanding. "There is more to the story," he said, his voice low and heavy with unspoken emotion. "More than I knew, more than I wanted to know." He looked at her then, his gaze intense, searching. "We must find the truth," he said. "We must understand why Ilara did what she did, why she sided with Rorik." He paused, his expression hardening, his body radiating a newfound determination. "And we must stop them," he said. "We must prevent them from completing their plan." Their plan? What plan? Briar didn't know, but she sensed that it was something dangerous, something catastrophic, something that threatened not only them, but the entire world. She nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs, a mixture of fear and resolve flooding through her veins. She was afraid, yes, but she was also determined. She would stand by Kalen's side. She would help him uncover the truth. She would fight. They left the ridge, descending into the valley, moving towards the Silverwood, towards the answers, towards the inevitable confrontation. The journey had taken on a new urgency, a new purpose. It was no longer just about survival, about escape. It was about truth, about justice, about redemption. The heart's reckoning had begun. They were walking into a storm of revelations, a tempest of emotions, a battle not just against Rorik, but against the ghosts of the past, against the lies that had shaped their lives, against the truth that threatened to destroy them both. But hand in hand, they were stepping forward instead of shrinking away. Chapter 18. Where Shadows Dance. The Silverwood was everything the legends had promised and more. Towering trees, their leaves shimmering with an ethereal, silver light, reached towards the sky, their branches intertwining to form a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight, creating a world of perpetual twilight. The air was thick with magic, with the presence of other werewolves, a palpable hum that resonated deep within Briar's bones. It wasn't a single, unified settlement, but rather a collection of hidden enclaves scattered throughout the forest, connected by a network of winding paths and secret trails. The werewolves of the Silverwood were a diverse group, representing different bloodlines, different traditions, different levels of control. Some had embraced the wolf completely, living as feral creatures, roaming the forests, hunting their prey. Others had found a balance, integrating their wolf nature with their human side, living in small communities, maintaining a semblance of civilization. And some were struggling, caught between two worlds, battling the constant urge to succumb to the beast within. Kalen led Briar to one of the more secluded enclaves, a small village nestled in a hidden valley, surrounded by towering cliffs and cascading waterfalls. The houses were built of wood and stone, blending seamlessly with the natural surroundings, almost invisible to the untrained eye. The inhabitants of the village were wary at first, their golden eyes and some, a disturbing crimson assessing the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. But Kalen, using an ancient language, a dialect of the Holophong, spoke to them, explaining their situation, their quest for answers, their need for sanctuary. An elder, a woman named Lyra, with silver hair and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries, listened intently, her gaze piercing, her expression unreadable. She was the leader of this enclave, a powerful werewolf who had mastered the balance between her human and wolf nature, a respected figure within the Silverwood. After a long silence, Lyra spoke, her voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "The Holophong," she said, the name a whisper, a legend, a warning. "We have heard tales of your curse, of your brother." She looked at Briar then, her gaze assessing, judging. "And you," she said, "are the key. The one who broke the curse. The one who holds the power." Briar nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was no longer hiding, no longer denying her nature, her destiny. Lyra turned back to Kalen, her expression shifting, her gaze softening. "We will offer you sanctuary," she said. "We will help you find the answers you seek. But be warned. The Silverwood is not safe. There are dangers here. Shadows that dance in the darkness." Shadows? Briar knew she meant Rorik, but she also sensed that there was more. Something else, something hidden, something waiting. Lyra led them to a small, empty cottage on the edge of the village, a place where they could rest, where they could plan, where they could prepare. It was simple, rustic, but safe.
For now.
As they settled in, Kaelin explained more about the Silverwood, about its history, its customs, its dangers. He told her about the different factions, the rivalries, the power struggles that existed within this hidden world. He also spoke of Alara, his voice filled with a mixture of pain and confusion. He was still struggling to reconcile the image of his beloved with the betrayer she appeared to be in Briar's dream. There must be an explanation, he said, his voice low and desperate. Something we don't know. Something hidden. Briar agreed. She, too, felt that there was more to the story, more to Alara's actions than they understood. She remembered the dream, the image of Alara standing beside Rorik, her expression a mixture of triumph and despair.
Despair?
Why despair? If she had sided with Rorik, if she had betrayed Kaelin, why would she feel despair? There was a piece missing, a crucial element that would unlock the truth, that would explain Alara's actions, that would resolve the conflict that raged within Kaelin's heart, within their relationship. They decided to seek out Lyra, to ask for her help, for her guidance, for her wisdom. She was the elder, the leader, the one who knew the history of the Silverwood, the one who might have answers, the one who might shed light on the shadows that danced around them. The shadows were growing longer, and the whispers in the Silverwood were growing louder. They needed answers, and they needed them soon. Chapter 19. A Love Worth Dying For. Lyra listened patiently, her ancient eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight that illuminated her small, cozy dwelling. She sat on a low stool, her hands resting on her knees, her posture erect, her expression serene, yet filled with an underlying power that commanded respect. Kaelin and Briar sat opposite her, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They had recounted Briar's dream, the unsettling image of Alara siding with Rorik, the revelation that had shattered Kaelin's world and cast a long shadow over their quest. When they had finished, Lyra remained silent for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful, her mind seemingly reaching back through the centuries, searching for answers in the tangled threads of history. The past, she said finally, her voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them, is never truly gone. It lingers, like a shadow, influencing the present, shaping the future. She looked at Kaelin, her gaze filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. Your love for Alara, she said, was legendary. A bond that transcended time, that defied the boundaries between worlds. She paused, her expression shifting, her gaze hardening. But love, she added, can be a weapon. A tool of manipulation, of deception. Kaelin flinched, his body tensing, his golden eyes clouded with pain. He had always believed in Alara's love, in her innocence, in her sacrifice. But Lyra's words, Briar's dream, were forcing him to confront a truth he had long avoided, a truth that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. Alara, Lyra continued, was powerful. More powerful than you knew. She was a seer, a weaver of magic, a manipulator of destinies. She looked at Briar then, her gaze intense, searching. And you, she said, are her descendant. You carry her blood, her power, her legacy. Briar nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had felt it, the connection to Alara, the power that flowed through her veins, the responsibility that came with it. The curse, Lyra said, her voice taking on a harder edge, was not what you believed. It was not a punishment, but a protection. A desperate attempt to contain the darkness that Rorik embraced. She explained that Alara, seeing the future, seeing the devastation that Rorik would unleash, had devised a plan, a desperate gamble to save the world. She had cursed Kaelin, not to punish him, but to imprison him, to keep him safe, to prevent him from being corrupted by Rorik's influence. And she had allied herself with Rorik, not out of love, not out of betrayal, but out of necessity. She had played a dangerous game, a deadly dance, manipulating him, controlling him, using his own ambition against him, delaying his plans, waiting for the right moment, for the right person to break the curse, to defeat him. That person, Lyra explained, was Briar. The revelation hit them like a physical blow, a wave of understanding that washed away the doubt, the confusion, the pain. Alara had not betrayed Kaelin. She had sacrificed herself, her reputation, her happiness, to save him, to save the world. Kaelin stared at Lyra, his golden eyes wide with disbelief, his expression a mixture of relief and a profound, overwhelming grief. He had spent a century hating Alara, blaming her for his suffering, and now he understood. He understood the depth of her love, the magnitude of her sacrifice, the price she had paid. He looked at Briar then, his gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude and a love that transcended time, that defied the boundaries between worlds. He saw Alara in her strength, in her courage, in her willingness to sacrifice everything for those she loved. He reached out, his hand covering hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of energy through their bodies, a connection that was both familiar and new. "She loved you," Briar said, her voice choked with emotion. "More than anything." Kaelin nodded, tears welling up in his golden eyes, tears of grief, of relief, of a love that had endured for centuries, a love that was worth dying for. But the danger was not over. Rorik was still out there, still plotting, still waiting. And now he knew the truth. He knew that Alara had betrayed him, that Briar was the key to his defeat. He would be coming for them, more powerful, more dangerous, more desperate than ever before. The final confrontation was inevitable, and they had to be ready. They had to prepare, to unite, to fight. For Alara, for themselves, for the future. The love that had been revealed, the sacrifices that had been made, had given them something to fight for, something worth risking everything for. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The air in the Silverwood crackled with anticipation, a palpable tension that hung heavy in the twilight atmosphere. The werewolves of the Enclave, alerted to the impending danger, prepared for battle, their senses on high alert, their bodies poised for action. They were a diverse group, united by their shared nature, by their loyalty to Lyra, and by their fear of Rorik. Kaelin and Briar stood at the center of the village, surrounded by the standing stones that marked the heart of the Enclave, their power amplified by the ancient magic that permeated this place. They were ready as they could ever be, for the final confrontation. Kaelin had shed his sorrow, his grief, his doubt. He had embraced the truth, the knowledge of Alara's sacrifice, the understanding of her love, the power that it gave him. He was no longer a prisoner of the past, a victim of the curse. He was a warrior, a protector, a lover. Briar, too, had transformed. She had shed her fear, her insecurity, her human limitations. She had embraced the wolf within, the power that flowed through her veins, the destiny that had been thrust upon her. She was no longer a quiet, unassuming widow. She was a descendant of Alara, a wielder of magic, a fighter. They stood hand in hand, their fingers intertwined, their bodies touching, their souls connected. They were two halves of a whole, two sides of the same coin, two lovers bound by fate, by destiny, by a love that transcended time, that defied the boundaries between worlds. And then he appeared, Rorik. He emerged from the shadows of the trees, his figure silhouetted against the faint light that filtered through the branches. He was taller now, broader, more muscular, his body radiating a raw, untamed power that seemed to distort the very air around him. His eyes burned with a crimson light, a reflection of the rage, the hatred, the madness that consumed him. He was not alone. He was surrounded by a pack of werewolves, creatures who had embraced the wolf completely, who had succumbed to the darkness, who had chosen to follow him. They were feral, savage, their eyes glowing with a bloodthirsty light, their bodies poised for attack. "Brother," Rorik said, his voice a low, guttural growl, the word dripping with sarcasm and malice. "I see you have found yourself a new pet. And a new army." He looked at Briar then, his crimson eyes sweeping over her, assessing, judging. He saw the power she possessed, the connection to Alara, the threat she represented. "You cannot stop me," he said, his voice filled with a chilling confidence. "I am stronger now. I have embraced the darkness. I will rule." Kalen stepped forward, his golden eyes meeting Rorik's crimson gaze, his expression unreadable. "It is over, Rorik," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "Your reign of terror ends here." Rorik laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the clearing. "You are a fool, brother," he said. "You always were. You cling to your humanity, to your weakness. You do not understand the true power of the wolf." He raised his hand, a signal to his pack. They surged forward, a wave of fur and teeth and claws, attacking with a savage ferocity. The battle began. It was a chaotic, brutal melee, a whirlwind of fur and blood and magic. The werewolves of the Silverwood fought bravely, defending their home, their lives. Kalen fought with a fierce determination, his movements fluid and precise, his golden eyes burning with a protective light. He was fighting for Briar, for Alara, for the future. Briar fought alongside him, her hands glowing with an ethereal light, her body moving with a speed and agility she never knew she possessed. She was wielding the power of Alara, the magic that flowed through her veins, deflecting attacks, healing wounds, protecting those around her. But Rorik was powerful. He was stronger, faster, more ruthless than any werewolf they had ever encountered. He moved through the battle like a force of nature, tearing through his enemies, his claws dripping with blood, his eyes blazing with fury. He reached Kalen, their bodies clashing in a brutal embrace. They grappled, they wrestled, they fought with a ferocity born of centuries of rivalry, of hatred, of a twisted, broken brotherhood. Briar saw Rorik land a blow, his claws raking across Kalen's chest, drawing a deep, agonizing wound. Kalen staggered, his body faltering, his strength waning. Rorik laughed, a triumphant, chilling sound. "You are weak, brother,"
he roared.
"You always were. You will die." He raised his claws for the final blow, his eyes filled with a bloodthirsty light. Briar knew she had to act, to intervene, to save him. She ran towards them, her hands raised, her body glowing with an even brighter light, channeling all her power, all her love, into a single, desperate attack. "No," she cried, her voice echoing through the clearing. A wave of energy erupted from her, a force so powerful it slammed into Rorik, sending him flying backwards, crashing into one of the standing stones. The stone cracked, shattered, and a blinding light erupted, engulfing Rorik, consuming him, erasing him from existence. The battle ended. The remaining werewolves of Rorik's pack, seeing their leader defeated, scattered, disappearing back into the shadows of the trees. The werewolves of the Silverwood stood victorious, battered and bruised, but alive. Briar rushed to Kalen's side, her hands hovering over his wounds, her eyes filled with tears. He was alive, but barely. She channeled her power, her magic, into healing him, closing the wounds, mending the broken bones, restoring his strength. Slowly, painfully, Kalen opened his eyes, his golden gaze meeting hers. He smiled, a weak, faint smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Briar," he whispered, his voice raspy, his breath shallow. "You saved me." "We saved each other," she said, her voice choked with emotion. They held each other, their bodies trembling, their hearts beating as one. They had survived. They had won. They had found each other. The final confrontation had tested their love, their strength, their very souls. And they had emerged, scarred but victorious, their bond stronger than ever before. Epilogue. The years that followed were a tapestry woven with threads of peace, of healing, and of a love that deepened with each passing season. The Silverwood became their home, a sanctuary where they could be themselves, where they could embrace their dual nature, where they could live. Kalen, freed from the shadow of his brother, from the weight of the past, found a serenity he had never known. He became a leader, a guide, a mentor to the younger werewolves of the Enclave, teaching them to control their powers, to balance their human and wolf sides, to live in harmony with the world around them. Briar, too, blossomed. She embraced her heritage, her connection to Alara, her power as a weaver of magic. She became a healer, a protector, a voice for the voiceless, using her abilities to help others, to mend the broken, to bring light to the darkness. They explored their love, a love that was both passionate and profound, a love that had survived centuries of hardship, a love that had conquered death itself. They learned to trust each other completely, to rely on each other implicitly, to support each other unconditionally. They never forgot Alara, her sacrifice, her courage, her love. They honored her memory, keeping her spirit alive in their hearts, in their actions, in their lives. They often returned to Thornmoor, to the ancient church, to the whispering woods, to the place where their journey had begun. They walked hand in hand, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night, their presence a silent testament to the power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, the magic that existed in the world. The townspeople of Thornmoor, initially fearful, gradually came to accept them, to understand them, to respect them. They saw the good that they did, the peace that they brought, the hope that they inspired. The crimson moon, once a symbol of fear, of danger, of the curse, became a symbol of transformation, of renewal, of love. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there is always light, always hope, always the possibility of a new beginning. One evening, as they stood on the cliffs overlooking the Silverwood, the moon a silver disk in the inky sky, Kalen turned to Briar, his golden eyes filled with a love that was as deep and as vast as the universe itself. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "For everything. For saving me, for loving me, for being you." Briar smiled, her eyes mirroring his love, her heart overflowing with a joy that knew no bounds. "We saved each other," she said, her voice soft, tender. "And we found each other. And that's all that matters." They embraced, their bodies melting together, their souls entwined, two lovers bound by fate, by destiny, by a love that would last for eternity. The wind whispered through the silver trees, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, carrying the echoes of their laughter, carrying the promise of a future filled with peace, with happiness, with love. And above them, the moon shone brightly, a silent witness to their enduring bond, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. Their journey had been long and arduous, filled with pain and loss, but it had led them to this, to a love that was stronger than any curse, brighter than any darkness, and more enduring than time itself. The end.